Kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News with Big Hairy Chewy and Bigger Hairier Pat. I think that's official. How are you, man?
Good, mate. Good. I just
Busy,
realised I
busy?
look like a rugged bushman who lives in
You
a
do.
hut.
You do.
I don't live in a hut because if I
You
did,
don't.
it would be leaking.
Evening all. Well, I don't live in a hut either, and where I'm living is leaking. Hiya. Good evening, all. People jumping in already and becoming involved. Nice to be with you. Remember, we do have Discord now up and running, and we want to open up opportunities for people who want to communicate with us on Discord directly, i.e. like a call-in phone call. So you can jump on the Discord server, and if you want to have a chat with us at any stage, enter the waiting room. And if we get a chance to get to you, we will come across and say g'day at some stage about some of the stuff we're talking about. If you want to add to the conversation, you are more than welcome to hit us up on our Discord. At some stage, I will also go into the Discord, and in fact, maybe I'll just do it now. I'll just go invite people. I'll copy the link, and it ends in that, and I'll put it into the chats. Dun, 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 dun. So then people can see for themselves the Discord. And get involved if they want to, or just join the Discord. It's going to be a place we use in the future. There it is in the chat now. It is going to be something we use in the future for communication and for chatting and for hanging out afterwards, and for also allowing people to call in as well. We're thinking about getting some telephone lines as well, but you know, in the startup stage, we think a Discord is a pretty good, inexpensive way to enable you guys to communicate with us as if it was a telephone, but not being a telephone if you want. Fair, Chewy?
Yes, I agree.
I've had a bit of a cool day. I think you've seen a couple of my my tweets out there today about my cool day. It's been kind of fun. I've been teasing this for a little while, and I got a chance today to speak to the director of the Trump documentary series, Alex Holder. And I have to say, had a huge amount of fun speaking to him. And I think what we might do to start the show off is I've already cut a couple of clips. Now that actual conversation is going to come up live in this YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube at 8:30 a.m. on Friday morning. And also we do it as an audio podcast, so it'll get released at the same time. And I'm thinking about playing it here in its entirety on Friday night, turning it into the Friday night show for this, for people who want to join us at the regular time and see what we're talking about. But what I thought I'd do, if it's cool with you, Chewmeister, have you got the new Twitter handle yet?
I do have a new
Chewarama Ding Dong. Is that the one we went with?
No, it's not that. I went with the incredibly imaginative at Chewy NZ.
Oh, nice. I thought what I might do to start off with is play a couple of clips. They're only like 3 minutes each, or that one's 4 minutes each, to give people a bit of a taste as to what the podcast was all about. It's obviously very news content anyway. This man spent hundreds of hours in and around Trump and Trump's family. I believe they have 200 hours of footage, and over 11 hours of actual sit-down interviews with Trump and 3 of his children, Ivanka, Don Jr., and Eric. And yeah, the documentary series is currently available on TV3 3 now if you want to check it out. They're not, funnily enough, they're not going to broadcast it, which I think is a bit peculiar. It's a Discovery Plus product, and they are now owned by Discovery. They're not going to broadcast it, but it is available on their online service, which is where I watched it. So let's have a look at a couple of clips. Are you down for this, Chew?
Yeah, but
all right. So this was one of my favorite questions, which is why I've cut it out. We'd had a conversation around, in fact, I think the second part we're going to play is actually the part that plays in the podcast just before this bit, which is when Alex was talking to the president, and the president was talking about how smart the people were who went into the Capitol building. And that prompted my question, something I've always been interested in, is Donald Trump actually smart? Like, is he a smart human being? It's because if he's not, it's very well hidden. I should say if he is, it's very well hidden. And so I won't preface it too much more than that, because I've included the question to Alex Holder. So this is the guy that made the documentary Unprecedented. The podcast is out in its entirety on Friday morning, but here's a little bit of a taster for you. Do you think Trump's smart? I mean, we know that he's got a very big brain, but like, is he his like? I mean, I know IQ doesn't always necessitate, you know, smartness in general, but is he a smart dude, or is he? Some people think he's basically a clown that's fallen into this thing, and because of his bravado, he pushes through. Other people think he's sort of calculating and exacting, and he knows exactly what he's doing when he talks about they're sending us their rapists and that kind of stuff. He's calculated. Where do you think he sits on that scale?
No, I was taken aback by how, I mean, dim-witted he is. I mean, he is just one of the most unusual people I've come across. He has various things. He's charming to a degree, but it's completely overpowered by his narcissism and by his obsession with anything that he owns or touches or is involved with is the best in the world. And it's sort of like a caricature. He's like a caricature of himself in respect. I mean, there's the story in Mar-a-Lago where he comes in to the room that we're setting up in, and the room is a very beautiful room actually. And I mean, Mar-a-Lago is stunning, and he comes in, and I go, "Hello, Mr. President," and you see this in the series, and he ignores me, and he just says, "Look at this floor. Isn't this the most beautiful floor in the world?" And I was just like, of all the things to talk about in that room, the floor was the last thing that was impressive. I mean, it was actually really quite scuffed and not at all nice at all. And then he sits down, and whilst all the cameras and things are being moved around, you do sort of the small talks. Like, Mr. President, last time we saw each other was a few months ago at the White House. And he immediately just says, straight away, he says, "Sure, but this is much more beautiful than the White House, right?" And like everything with him is always a one-upmanship. It's always he's better, or he owns something that's better than anyone else. And that was very odd. And frankly, the fact that he is unwilling, and I've said this a lot, which is the reason he's unwilling to accept that he lost the election fair and square, is because he's just completely lives in another world. He's just detached from any reality. And the reason for that is purely because Donald Trump cares about one thing, which is Donald Trump and the brand and what Trump is. And the idea of associating defeat with the brand just isn't acceptable to him. So and all the way through his life, whenever he's gone through objective defeats, whether it's a financial crisis, which led in various cases to bankruptcy and restrictions and things, to him, where he's lost buildings and whatnot, and where he has failed, he's always pivoted to something else, and he has always blamed other people, and he's never actually accepted that he had done anything or that what actually happened. So that was that. It wasn't sort of unusual, but like here, when you're the president of the United States and you're maintaining this position and eventually causing the tragedy that it caused, to be still to this day maintaining this insanity and influencing people, is just horrendous. And so, I mean, that definitely is the major factor. But no, he's definitely not he's a very odd man.
Go on, you're about to say it. He's definitely not the sharpest tool in the shed. I could hear that in the back of your mirror.
I was going to say the brightest bulb in the chandelier. But
I knew it was one of those things. So there you go. So
I don't know how I feel about that. On one hand, I am pleased that he's as big a dumbass as he comes across as.
Yeah.
But it's there's so many of his fans that sort of go, "Oh, he's playing 4D chess. It's all a persona. It's all this, that, and the other thing." But it just means that there's so many people that are worshipping this idiot. Like, because it's worship. You don't see people that actually like Biden driving around with trucks covered in flags or joining an insurrection. It's bizarre.
So I agree with you, but I guess as I don't pride myself, but I think I am a sane human being. I also know if I'm going to take the opinion of someone on if Donald Trump is smart or not, do I take the opinion of the person who has spent a couple of 100 hours with him, his family, and his circle, or some rando, as Dave Chappelle says, dusty white person from Ohio who's never met him and is just voting for him because, what's it called? Critical race theory is bad. You know, who's going to have more weight, in my opinion, to an accurate representation?
Yeah, absolutely. But isn't that terrifying though, that he has managed to find himself in the Oval Office with the nuclear codes and an entire country to play around with? Shouldn't they have checks and balances to stop that? Oh my God, it's terrifying.
Alex talks about, and I think he talked about it in the podcast, which is coming out Friday morning, 8:30 a.m. Be there. He talks in the podcast, I think, a little bit, but I saw him in an interview on CNN be more exact about it. Or maybe it was actually on Seth Meyers, the Seth Meyers show, where the first time he met and sat down with President Trump, at the end of the conversation, which was a month after he lost the election. So the first sit down he got was the first week of December. And he sat down with him, and Trump went straight into it. He didn't win. You know, Biden didn't win. He couldn't get 80 million votes. And he tells the story, Alex does, of when he finished that interview, he had to actually lean on the wall because he was like, what the hell did I just go through? Like he was unsteady on his feet. He was so shocked at the words coming out of Donald Trump's mouth and the opinions. And I know he said with Seth Meyers that he believed that Trump was just making it all up to start with, like it was his thing. But after a couple of interviews, Trump believes it. Trump believes what he's
crazy,
saying.
Right? He can't possibly. No, it's a house of cards. It's like you want to believe something else because the truth is just too scary. You know, that somebody like Trump can just stumble into the highest office in the most powerful country in the world.
There was 2 or 3 moments in the podcast, which is out Friday morning, 8:30, where he kind of teased, because he got subpoenaed to go to the January 6th Select Committee, right?
Yeah.
So he's testified, but he did it in private. Not like the, you know, when you're watching that, if you've seen any clips, they've got the footage of people talking to people in their office with terrible recording. He's done that. And that's available to be used. And he thinks probably, when I said to him, what was left on the cutting room floor, like what was edited, and he goes, well, I have a feeling you'll probably start to see some of that in the forthcoming months. So he's like, because he's given all the footage to the Select Committee, all of the footage, all 200 plus hours.
Oh, damn.
And he's testified before them. So there's probably more to come. Because I kind of said to him, because on TV3's on-demand service, it says season 1, episode 1, 2, 3. I said, is there a season 2? And it sounds like what he was kind of saying is season 2 might be the Select Committee. There might be season 2 showing a whole bunch of other footage which has not yet been seen yet. So I'll play one more clip, because that was a bit silly and a bit irreverent, I guess. But there was one really important part in the documentary series, and it was when Trump actually admitted that the people in the Capitol building were his people. You know, we're hearing a lot of defense of Trump by saying, oh, it's Antifa, it's BLM people, it's fake, it's false. Trump himself says that the people that went into the building were his people. And I'll play that clip for you now. There was this particular moment in the documentary when you were talking to Trump about January 6th, and he did talk about it. And he basically smashed any of the conspiracy theories out there that it's Antifa or it's, an inside job or whatever, when he acknowledges that the people breaking into the Capitol building were his supporters.
Well, it was a sad day, but it was a day where there was great anger in our country. The people went to Washington primarily because they were angry with an election that they think was rigged. A very small portion, as you know, went down to the Capitol, and then a very small portion of them went in. But I will tell you, they were angry from the standpoint of what happened in the election, because they're smart and they see and they saw what happened. And I believe that was a big part of what happened on January 6th.
And I wonder how that has gone under the radar. So, it feels, I could be wrong, but it feels like that's gone under the radar, because I was watching, there's that lovely Scottish guy on CNN who goes around doing vox pops with people. And he was at a Trump rally over the weekend, and they're all like, no, it's all fake, it's all fake, it's all Antifa, it's all Black Lives Matter, it's fake. But then Trump in your documentary confirms that the people in the Capitol were his people. And I'm amazed that it wasn't a headline for 24-hour news cycle for at least 3 or 4 of those news cycles, but it seems to have a little bit gone under the radar.
Yeah, I agree, and I've actually said this a lot. I think that was an incredibly important and fascinating moment, because not only does he do what you just said, Pat, in terms of making, drawing a direct link to his supporters going into the capital.
Yeah.
He calls them smart.
Yeah.
And he also says that the reason they went in was because they believe that their election was stolen. Well, the only reason they believed that their election was stolen was because he had told them that,
Yeah.
right? So he is literally admitting that the reason why people went into the capital is A, because they believe the election was stolen, and B, because they're smart, and C, they are his supporters. So that's the clear admission, right, of his culpability, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that he would, if you like, he had spent weeks after the election telling everyone that the election was stolen and that Mike Pence needs to come through. Now, after all the various things that they tried to do didn't work, all their court cases were all dismissed, the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. The last thing he had was this absurd idea that intervening on the 6th of January, where they have this ceremonial process of counting the Electoral College votes, intervening in that process would allow him to remain in office, right? And the only person he felt that could do that was the vice president. And he was obviously putting a lot of pressure on him. And we were at a rally the day before, or it was two days before, in Georgia, where he was really pushing that he hopes Mike Pence comes through. And he does the usual mafia boss type thing where it's like, and if he doesn't, then we won't like him very much.
He's going to go sleeping with the fishes.
Right, like exactly. Yeah, it's like the typical Trump thing, like we won't like him very much, nod, wink, wink, right?
Yeah.
And then on the day of January 6th, I mean, he literally says the words, like, we need to fight like hell, we need to get back our country. We're going to march down Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol. So he says all of this. So it's very clear as to why those people marched up Pennsylvania Avenue. It's very clear why they all came, because he had tweeted to everyone, come, to this massive rally at the Ellipse. And then in that interview, he clearly says the reason why they went in was because they felt the election was stolen and they're smart. So to me, that's, you're sort of bang to rights that point.
So there you go. Chewy, you want to? I mean, obviously there's a podcast coming out apparently live on Friday morning at 8:30. But do you want to add anything to what you've heard in those little clips?
I'm just sort of following on, like when you go, surely this can't happen. Surely this can't happen. I noticed in the comments here, we've had a chance where not only have you got a cartoonish buffoon like Trump managing to get in, you've got another one in one of our other strong progressive democracies, in old shambling Boris Johnson in the UK.
Yeah.
What's the reason? How does this happen? Is it just because people are so disengaged?
I think Boris Johnson was possibly a kind of flow on from Brexit. It was that whole kind of almost Trumpism, anti-establishment, pushback against the narrative, all that kind of thing. But the difference with Boris Johnson is he was still, love him or hate his politics, played by the rules, decent human being. When it was time to go, he went. And I haven't heard any conspiracies coming out from him as to why he did it. So, maybe I don't know too much about Boris Johnson, to be honest, but if what I hear you saying, maybe terrible human being, maybe bad politician, whatever, but still sort of played by the political rules, which is the place where Trump is different from all the other revolting politicians.
That's fair. I mean, yeah, we can't really call Trump a politician in the traditional sense, because he's not. He's like, and I'm not even putting Luxon in the same fucking planet as Trump. But
yeah,
the idea that politicians can't be trusted. They can never be trusted. We need people who aren't politicians to be our politicians. And I think this is what you're risking, is that you'll get someone that will sort of shake the foundations of the things that make the system work, and not in a good way.
Yeah. I mean, I've never agreed with that idea about getting someone outside the political world, because the political machine, I mean, love it or loathe it, say it's right or wrong, still needs to be oiled a certain way to get out of the other end of that machine what you need. And someone who knows the system and can work the system and works best in the system might be the best person for the job. Also, John Key was a bit of an outsider. He was quite a successful prime minister, and people liked him. So it's not that you have to be they always talk about the like Labour Party MPs going from student politics to sort of working for union, like kind of that all the way through. You don't have to be that. But I mean, I think that idea of, I don't think it's, some people think it's eliminating if you've been a lifelong politician. I think the possibility of being a lifelong politician means you might have a shit ton of experience to do the job well as well. It's kind of equal. It's kind of what we're about to go into this conversation, is that one side will say one thing and there might be some validity in it. The other side will say the opposing thing and there might be some validity in it. Probably the truth is somewhere in the middle, that you need to possibly have, some kind of reality of the real world, but also the experience of a politician to be able to function in that world best. And obviously Trump has neither. He has neither experience in the real world, or does he have, experience as a politician. So yeah, that was doomed to fail.
I mean,
fail it did.
When you go back to when he was elected, even your worst case scenario, like I remember sitting there going, this is going to be a disaster. I'm going to get so much material out of this. We're going to be laughing about it. It's going to be horrible for America, but it's going to be funny. I never would have thought that we'd end up with an almost insurrection over there. Like, what the fuck?
Well, I guess also, but I guess in theory, I like I Do It For You has just jumped in with a nice cheery thought. Skills required to be a politician, lie with a smile. In theory. And I think, and I know I often go to sporting analogies, and I'm sorry about that, but some of the best football coaches or managers around the world aren't particularly good football players. But if you get the right team around you, so in theory, someone like Trump could be president if you got the right team around you. But he was such a maniac and such a narcissist. He didn't. Remember, I hire the best people. The best people are the ones I hire. I hire the best people. And there's something like 8 people.
Children.
8 people from his administration would have been convicted of crimes, and his children, and Betsy DeVos, who can't string 2 sentences together. And so, I mean, in theory, if you had the right non-politician with the right team around them, sure. But that was an incident of having the wrong non-politician with a terrible team around them, and this is what you get. So, I think let's scroll up a bit. Let me go and get a chat, I think, from Kim, because, it's also always good. Every night we have to have at least one Goebbels quote. I think that's the rule for the show. If you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it, and you will even come to believe it yourself. Joseph Goebbels. I mean, that's a little rule we have, at least one Goebbels quote a night for people who are new to us. That's what we try and do. So there's our nightly quote from Goebbels. Dun, 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 dun.
It's either Goebbels or Churchill.
Something like that.
One or the other.
Yeah. Tiger says, Trump narrowed it down to the bare bones. Find what your voter base is passionate about. Say you'll fix it, and they'll forgive everything else. Yep. Probably simple. Singular issue voters. In America, that does happen a lot of the time, especially with the kind of religious right. If you do, abortion and the Supreme Court, and then anything else doesn't really matter. Even if you do grab people by the pussy, the rest can be forgiven.
I mean, that was the thing. It was people voting against, like you had people in the steel mills and the coal mines going, Trump's our man. And I just wanted to go, why?
Yeah.
What has he ever showed any sort of care for you people at all? And then the same for the religious right. There's what values that you supposedly have does he example for you? None of them. He's terrible person. And you're like, but he hates the same people we do. That's it. That's what it is. Ugh.
Yeah, and that probably comes back to a lot of politics, actually. Like at the moment, what you're seeing our opposition do is tell us how terrible the government is rather than how good they are. So a lot of political voting might just come down to they suck. We have to stop them. So vote for me, as opposed to I'm awesome. This is why you should vote for me. So that could be an element of what you're saying. If we hate the same people, they suck. Vote for me, and I'll make sure. Like Don Jr. spent the second election cycle that they lost. His little quote was, "Let's make liberals cry again." That was his quote for when all the Hillary Clinton fans were crying after the first election. So that's what he was literally trying to do. And it's a really interesting chat. It's a really interesting documentary as well. It's on, as I said, TV3, their on demand service. You should check it out. I watched it there. I know that some people will find other ways to watch it, but on demand TV3, not too bad with the adverts. I mean, there are little breaks that they have every now and again. They're between 60 and 90 seconds. I can handle that. And that's what I sort of checked it out. Hey, and saying all of that, should we jump into actually a news conversation, seeing we spent 25 minutes talking about an upcoming podcast? Because it does kind of flow on from this conversation a little bit, talking about what politicians say, left versus right, and maybe where the truth is somewhere in the middle. So this was a story on News Hub this evening, talking about the National Party attacking the government for their $1 billion spend on consultants. Now, straight away, and I'm sure you're the same, Chewy, I see that headline and I go, oh, that's not good. Spending money on consultants, $1 billion on consultants, it's not good. However, I'd like to, as we always try and do, talk this through and talk this out and find out what the truth is. In fact, you know what, we can't actually find out what the truth is, because there's no as is the norm with a news story. It's 3 minutes and they don't actually go into what necessarily it was spent on. It gives you some top line figures about what departments used it, but it doesn't really tell us what the money was spent on. So it's very hard to compare apples with apples when you don't know if it was spent on something worthwhile or if it was a waste of money. But the headline figure of $1 billion on consultants sounds pretty terrible. So let's go have a look at what the News Hub article said this evening.
There's a lot you can do with $1 billion. You could fund more than 14,500 registered nurses, more than 19,000 teachers, or buy around 74 million blocks of cheese.
Sorry to interrupt so quickly. I hate that thing, the blocks of cheese one. But also, just so we know, often consultants get brought in to do a job. And look, I'm not actually doing this to defend the government at all, but I'm just being clear. A consultant will get brought in to do a short-term contract to do a job, and then they leave. So this idea about it could fund 14,000 nurses for a year, right? And then not for the rest of our lives. Like the consultants that we don't know too much about might have been brought in to do a job, and then they go. That's why they're consultants, not employees. So the analogy as to what it could do is, it's a fair enough. The numbers might be the same, but it's not, again, apples with apples.
Can I just say we should cut out the middleman and just be paid in cheese?
Yep.
And then we won't have to go back to this analogy.
Yep, done. Let's do that. Then it'll be, the analogy after that will be milk, unfortunately. After it's not
got to
cheese.
get that cheese.
We'll keep going.
But instead, the government's spending $1 billion a year on contractors and consultants.
There can be good reasons why ministries and departments would spend money on contractors and consultants. If you look at big capital projects, for example, it is just the way that sector works.
Back in 2018, the cap on public servants was removed, the aim reducing the government's contractor and consultant spend. And since then, the number of public servants has grown, but the government's still spending just as much taxpayer money on contractors and consultants.
It's a failure on his part, and it's an addiction to spending by this government.
When election night rolls around, all the debates, we have to remember that's definitely one of our consume things, addiction to spending. Right? That's one of the quote lines that we're hearing. And I'll say this again, even though I have literally just said it. A contractor is not someone you employ for 12, 18, 24, 36, 48 months. There's someone that you bring in for a short-term job. So actually $1 billion on, forget the number because the number's horrifically high. Money on contractors may or may not be a wiser spend of money. We don't know all the details, depending on what they did. If there was a 6-week contract for a whole in something that, a government was doing, what's the opposite? You employ someone for the next 2.5 years and they sit around for 2 of those years and just do the 6 weeks worth of work. So that I don't like I don't like not knowing the exact details of stories, and I don't like not being able to go a bit deeper, which means we have to kind of go, well, actually, it might be a waste of money, but it might not. It depends what it was there for. So.
Say you've failed there.
No, not at all.
And there are some departments relying more and more on them. In the last 5 years, the Education Review Office has upped its spend by 154%, but wouldn't comment on why. The Ministry for Pacific Peoples has increased by 244%, pointing to its rapid growth and backfilling while recruiting. And the Ministry for Culture...
Well, I mean, they've explained it. Backfilling while recruiting. In other words, contracting temporarily whilst they fill their positions. I mean, I don't want to say the money's okay. I don't know because we haven't got that. But that reason seems reasonable. That if they haven't got someone in that position, they're looking for people to fill those positions, then they contract to other people who don't want to work full time. That seems like a reasonable way of spending contractor money to me.
Yeah, and I think with just that department alone, like there was a lot of criticism in the past that we hadn't maintained good links with our Pacific neighbours and stuff, and that was looked at as oh shit, we need to do better about that. Especially when the Chinese were basically coming in and taking, I guess, the traditional place that we would.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could see reasons for that one.
I mean, again, I'll be clear. Trust me, we're not saying Labour's sweet and National's wrong here. But all I'm trying to do is say, the number's so big it's scary, $1 billion, but the idea that you need to backfill positions whilst waiting for the skills to come into the ministry, that seems reasonable. Is it or isn't it? Oh, I guess we can't ever know that. But as a headline decision, it seems reasonable.
Culture and Heritage has splashed out a whopping 700% more, citing its COVID response and building the business case for the country's new public media.
So again, if it's to do with COVID and the new public media entity, both temporary things, obviously employing people to deal with COVID on a permanent contract when we all hope COVID won't be here. I wonder if part of the increase there is also there was an expectation that COVID would take a lot shorter time period, like it might be 12 months to get things sorted out. And now that we're rolling in past 2 years, that might be part of the balloon. I don't know. What do you reckon? Possibly?
Yeah, it could be. It could be. And I mean, that's the fact that it's Ministry of Culture and Heritage and it's that new public media entity. That's got a big old bullseye on it for there's people that don't like that. So yeah.
Yeah. All right, we'll keep going.
Entity.
There is waste which needs to be brought under control so that every single dollar is spent wisely and efficiently.
We do need to look at that closely to make sure that it's all justified. There's a lot of scrutiny on that area now. That's a good thing.
Scrutiny welcomed, but the government's yet to make a dent in its $1 billion spend. Imogen Wells, News Hub.
So Simeon Brown there from National says there is waste, which needs to be looked at and brought under control. Now, my response to that would be, what's the waste and what would National do about it? So this is the perfect example of what an opposition party does. They just point out what they say is wrong without necessarily giving any solutions. So I mean, I think every politician would say there's some waste in the system. So let's tick that box. How much waste and how do we deal with it? That's, as a voter, what I want to know.
Yeah, and I think Simeon needs to get a smaller tie, but it makes his head look. Anyway, he's just reading from National's playbook.
Of course.
If Labour is spending money, then it must be wasteful. And it's completely without context. They want a lot of the voting base to remember the bad old days of big government, Ministry of Works and just, a huge amount of people sort of standing around kicking rocks for railways and stuff like that. Big bureaucracies. And I think because such a big axe was swung at those in the late 80s and the 90s, like it was a bloodletting. And we've never got back to that level of bloat ever since. But to go, the government spent too much on the back of the COVID response.
Yeah.
Like, what are they thinking? Like they didn't get, they gave money to businesses and they trusted businesses to do the right thing. And I think that's why hasn't that made a dent for them? You know, they propped up a hell of a lot of businesses going, hey, look, don't worry about paying your staff, we will. And that accomplished the aims of like making sure people were able to stay home, that they were going to service their mortgage. Like it wasn't altruistic just for the people. It kept business humming along as well.
Yeah. And I mean,
and that was just like, yep, cool, money machine go burr. Everybody gets money now. You know?
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk a bit about that with the Bernard Hickey article out of Spinoff before we head off tonight as well. And I think it's in that article that Bernard Hickey makes the point that back in the day, i.e. during COVID, it was actually National who was screaming for more money to be given to businesses, that Labor wasn't giving enough. So now they're being criticised for the spend by the party that was saying they should be doing more back then. So, you know, grain of salt, maybe that would be fair. So let's go on to the next part of this. And like I said, I like to weave a narrative through these things because where we're getting to is this idea that National and Labor operate differently. I don't think necessarily either is 100% correct, but often I think what you find is somewhere in the middle is the truth, you know? So Labor is being criticised for their spend on contractors. 2 weeks ago, we showed you this clip, and I'm going to show you a very short part of it right now, which is Christopher Luxon on News Talk ZB talking to Kerry Woodham. Kerry Woodham makes the point because one of the talking points at the moment from National is the overinflated public sector, right? And that National is going to decimate that, or that's my words, not their words. And then Kerry Woodham makes a very good point to Christopher Luxon is once they reduce the number in the public sector, is that then they'll have to just go and start using contractors. And just listen to Christopher Luxon's response about a national government having to use contractors. Remember, the national government's currently talking in a negative way, criticizing Labor for their spend on contractors, right? Now listen to what Christopher Luxon says about when they reduce the numbers in the public sector and if they have to go to contractors and spend more money. You hear how he obviously you'd expect him to be very anti that because they're anti that with Labor doing it. That would be my expectation, Joey, because that would be consistent, yeah? So let's have a listen.
This government's already added 14,000 bureaucrats into Wellington in less than 4 years. And we're not talking, it's places like education. We spent $5 billion more. We added 1,400 more staff to the Ministry of Education, bringing it up to 4,000 people. We didn't invest it in frontline services of teachers or teacher aides or anything like that. That's just bureaucrats sitting in Wellington at that point.
But then you've got National who gets rid of them, and then you get the consultancy bill going through the roof because you actually need certain people to do certain jobs. If you get rid of them, you just have to hire them back on a higher hourly rate.
Yeah, you do, but you've also got a government that conflates and confuses.
Hang on. Sorry. No, I need to go
straight into it.
But I need to go back because it sounded like he said, yes, National will use contractors and will spend much more. And it sounded like
we'll pay them more.
It sounded like he very flippantly went, yeah, of course, and then moved on. Maybe I missed it. Let's just double check that. Hang on.
This government's already added 14,000 bureaucrats into Wellington in less than 4 years. And we're not talking, it's places like education. We spent $5 billion more. We added 1,400 more staff to the Ministry of Education, bringing it up to 4,000 people. We didn't invest it in frontline services of teachers or teacher aides or anything like that. That's just bureaucrats sitting in Wellington at that point.
But then you've got National who gets rid of them, and then you get the consultancy bill going through the roof because you actually need certain people to do certain jobs. If you get rid of them, you just have to hire them back on a higher hourly rate.
Yeah, you do, but you've also got a government that conflates and confuses spending.
You do, but let's talk about how bad Labor is. I mean, I won't play this game. If I see it, I will show you, right? And this is not me saying Labor's got it right. $1 billion on contractors. I'm like, holy shit, that's a lot of money. But I'm not going to play the game where National has the answer when the leader of the party said 2 weeks ago that when challenged that the price of contractors under their system would go through the roof, he went, yeah, of course, but it's ridiculous
because it'll have a blue logo on it. It'll be fine. Trust me, I ran an airline. You know, it's just bizarre. Like often, like there's two things I want to say. National are going to hammer the word bureaucrat because it's so loaded with negative connotations.
Yeah.
Bureaucrats sitting there in Wellington.
Yeah.
Now, I know people that are public servants, and every single one of them gives a shit about what they're doing. And it really annoys me to see them cast as bureaucrats working for the Ministry of Health in the middle of a pandemic, all of that sort of thing. You know, and if they have to pack up their office and leave because National get in, and then National turns around and goes, oh, actually, shit, do you want to come back? They are going to turn around and they're going to go, yep, but because I have no certainty, I am going to ask for the big bucks.
Yeah, of course.
Whereas, if I had a job that I could rely on and it was work that I enjoyed doing, sure, it's not as much about the money.
Well, I mean, I can also tell you that, I mean, I've worked as a contractor in the radio industry and I've worked as an employee. When I worked as a contractor on a 12-month thing, I charged double because there's no way I have to pay my own ACC. There's no sick leave. If I don't turn up, I don't get paid. You know, all these things. But of course, when you think about it, if I don't turn up, I don't get paid. Most of us are off for a few days a year and you charge double because you've got all these other things on top of it. So yes, as Chewy, as you're saying, you lose all the privileges of being an employee, right? So you add a zero, or you double a figure, or you add 20% or whatever. And it's just, yeah. Look, I mean, and look, I'm not saying that the government's doing the right thing. In fact, I would probably rather that we have employed people on like a full-time employee on a 2-year contract for the COVID thing than contractors. But it's an unknown end to a health crisis. So that's the way they went, and that's the way they went. And then you've got the leader of the National Party very flippantly confirming that when they get rid of the bureaucrats, they'll be paying contractors and then the price will go through the roof. Well, yeah, but Labor's terrible.
Well, look, everybody knows that the best armies in the world are mercenaries. So let's get more mercenaries in our public service.
Let's continue this conversation on, because actually I found this quite late tonight. It was an article actually written, I'm pretty sure, written by Chris Hipkins. And it says,
got time to do any writing.
This is in the New Zealand Herald, in the premium section, because that's how I roll, baby. And it says, Chris Hipkins, reform of the vocational education system is a must. Headline says, chronic underfunding by National left the vocational education sector in a perilous state, says Education Minister Chris Hipkins. I won't go through the whole thing, but let me just read you this one part. And again, this is not even necessarily me saying this is 100% accurate. It's a Labour Party talking about Stephen Joyce, the former education minister. But this is leading on to this point about one side says one side says the other. So this is what Christopher Hipkins says. Underpinning the confusion that both employees and learners experience when trying to navigate the system, this is the education system, was the chronic underfunding over National's 9 years that resulted in Labour having to inject 100 million into the sector to stop several institutions from completely falling over. Not only that, but without change, the sector, i.e. the taxpayer, was facing increasing deficits in the vicinity of $280 million by 2022. The dire financial situation can be sheeted home to National's short-sighted reaction to the global financial crisis at a time when a government should invest in business, training, and people. They did the opposite. In 2009, National cut $500 million from tertiary education and turned off the tap right across the board. Polytechnics had to cut, putting course quality and opportunities at risk. Firms had to sack apprentices, as a result, New Zealand has a massive skills shortage, which National had to plug by opening the immigration floodgates. New Zealand is still paying the price for that. While our population soared, National did not fund extra for schools, hospitals, or houses, leaving us with an infrastructure crisis. I think that's a little bit, because the infrastructure crisis isn't since 2009. It's systemic from a long way back. But as I said, this is Hipkins' perspective, or at least his writings. That is taking time and hundreds of billions of dollars to catch up with, and human misery that could have been avoided, is my opinion piece. So this is the thing that I wanted to say about these two parties, right? Typically what happens is National gets in and they go, too much spending, cut. And then Labor gets in and goes, we're underfunded, fund. And then National gets in and goes, too much spending, cut. And we're just seeing another cycle of that right now.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously Labor has increased a bunch of the spending. I would point to things like COVID and stuff as to why, not even offering an opinion on whether it's right or wrong, but as to why. And National saying they're spending too much. National gets in, cut. Labor then goes, well, look at all the underfunded situations that National's doing. Look at the cash registers in the emergency departments again. And then they'll promise to spend more money. They'll get in and they'll fund. And probably the truth or the best outcome is somewhere in the middle, possibly somewhere less than the spend that Labor does, but certainly more than the cut that National does. And I think I kind of have evidence for that. Well, may not be evidence. That might be a bit of a long bow, but it's a conversation I had last week with the Honourable Michael Woodhouse when it was announced that inflation was at 7.3%. Now, Michael Woodhouse was using one of the National talking points about these 14,000 new bureaucrats, and so I wanted to know. So when National gets in, are they all do they all need to get their CVs ready? And what he says, and I will play it for you, but to paraphrase what he says is, oh, no, we think we don't need as many as there are. So what he's saying is, what that says to me is probably, let's say that there was, 300,000 bureaucrats. He says they've put 14,000 more in, so it should be 286. And he's saying we're not going to get rid of all of them, but we will get rid of some of them. So that probably means, as I've said, somewhere in between the 14,000 that they've added and the 14,000 that there is might actually be the number that is needed to run something. That's at least my hypothesis. Let me play this bit for you. Yeah, finally. So you've mentioned 2 to 20 times in this conversation, just joking, about the number of bureaucrats going up. So we can expect National to cut back on the number of bureaucrats, or will you leave it as it is and there'll be a natural attrition? Or will there be 15,000 in, so those people better get their CVs ready?
I don't think we would lose that many, but I don't think I'm convinced we can run Wellington on fewer than we've got now.
So there you go. I mean, to me, that actually speaks to maybe we did need more bureaucrats, but not as many as they've got. I think it's probably fair to say, when talking to their base, Labor and the left always look to fund as much as they can, maybe too much at times. National and their base always want to fund as little as they can, and maybe somewhere in the middle is actually the place we, the public, would be best served, where we are not overspending when we can, but not underfunding necessary services.
Yeah, and I mean, the National keep talking about government funds and taxpayer dollars like it's running a business, and I just want to say, government is not a business. Running a country is not a business. It doesn't work to the same rules. You don't have to balance a checkbook. Taxpayers aren't customers. There's a whole bunch of things there that I don't like about what they do. But yeah, it's the middle ground, and I just hope that they stay reasonably like the big pendulum swing from government to government of, like, I remember some brutal cuts, like mentioned the cuts to the polytechs and stuff like that, and they were always holding up of like, oh, there's these stupid courses like homeopathy and how to be a nail technician and stuff like that, and they're holding those up as the bad polytech courses, but they were cutting night classes for people reskilling. They were cutting classes for people to learn technology as their jobs transitioned and stuff like that. It was brutal. So yeah, it needs to be closer to the middle, and it needs to be more smooth process. But I think the more and more that I look at it, this myth of National being the party, the economy, the ones that can balance the books, this is just not borne out by history.
No, it's not. That's a very fair point as well, because like if you look back to the last significant Labor government before this, so the first decade of the century, Michael Cullen running surpluses and that all the way through. One of the reasons we survived the global financial crisis as well as we did, although it wasn't a perfect thing, was the surpluses that Michael Cullen had been running to have some money in the bank to be able to get us too. So I actually agree with you. When you look at how prosperous New Zealand has been, often it's, say, a year or two after a Labour government gets in, flowing on to a year or two after a national government gets in, because that's sort of the time period that a government needs a couple of years to get things going in. So I think that if you look at, for example, the wealth of the nation, I mean, like I don't have the numbers in front of me. You know, I love numbers, so we could go get them. But the things I've looked at before in my past, because I do this and I get the numbers and I talk about them, has always been we seem to do better financially, business-wise, under a Labour government, although the right seems to try and sell the story that they're the party of small government. Mind you, they're the party of small business, although Mr. Luxon does think those businesses are pretty soft at the moment. So,
you know, I think, you know, we'll be looking back at these last two years so far with a magnifying glass to see how we've handled it. I still think, for the most part, we've handled it pretty well, but we're getting to hopefully a tailing off, and when that pressure comes off, that's when the books get opened, and we go, okay, cool. So where did we fuck up? Did we fuck up? What could we have done better? I mean, I notice people calling for an independent commission and stuff like that. I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea, because there's a lot of things to be learned about how this country has handled COVID. But yeah, there's stuff that has still got big question marks over it at the moment. Like, there's an enormous amount of money that went out, and how are we getting that back?
I was listening to an American economist on one of the channels today as I was doing some work. And they were also saying one of the problems that they're facing at the moment, them being economists, was what's going on is this has never happened before. We're in unprecedented times. That name's from the documentary stuck in my head. That they've never had the situation. Oh, okay.
Hey.
There you go. that there's never been a time in history with this kind of event, i.e. COVID, followed by governments then support, like in, you know, the Spanish flu and stuff. The social welfare wasn't a thing. You know, just die on the side of the street, please. You know, it wasn't there. So this has never happened before. So it's actually very, very difficult to project what's going to happen next. And all governments are it's a little bit the blind leading the blind, and all centralized. This is the other thing, and we will get to this, although we're kind of running short of time now. Well, not really, but I don't want to be here till 11:30, as Chew and I often do. All governments, all centralized banks have kind of done the same thing, which is what is being criticized now for what the centralized banks have done. The Reserve Bank here in New Zealand have all done a very similar thing. And what New Zealand has done with the Reserve Bank has put us at 7.3%, looking at our trading partners who are around the 9% mark. So even though there's been mistakes made, and primarily by the Reserve Bank, the mistakes were based around projections. But how do you project in an unprecedented time with an economy that you've never seen before? And so you've got no data to draw on as to what's going to happen. You know, and I don't want to let them off the hook because that's their job. But, you know, there's an element of, you know, how do you know, if there's a new sport that's been invented and the first ever World Cup is going together, how do you project who's going to win it? Because you've never seen these teams play together before. It's just, yeah, it's a tough road. It's the Reserve Bank's ultimately their responsibility. They got it wrong. One of the reasons we're at 7.3 is because of their projections that were wrong, but they were projecting into a black hole which has never existed before. So how can you expect them to get it right?
Yeah, and it came on so quickly. Like, remember, there was a couple of months between, oh, maybe this COVID thing is something we need to worry about, to holy shit, it's here, stay home. Nobody go to work. So, yeah.
Now,
and part of this is what we're going to talk about now.
Yeah, well, you brought this up. So let me I've got a couple of bits highlighted, which I'll get to, and then I'll throw it to you, and you can give us a synopsis of it. So Bernard Hickey, the Reserve Bank facing consequences of printing, quote, tidal wave of cash. Article here talking about Grant Robertson responding to this idea. Robertson was certainly combative yesterday when responding to the call for an inquiry. I don't think Mr. Luxon has any moral high ground on this. I don't know why I just put on a voice there. It was just a voice. It wasn't me trying to do Grant Robertson. He said there will inevitably be space for us to look at all manner and aspects of the response, and I'm sure the Reserve Bank will do its bit in there. But the point I'm making here is that I vividly remember calls from the National Party to spend more money than we did supporting businesses. So that was the first point. I actually had about 4 points of this article, but I'm just going to go to the other two, because the other thing that I thought was particularly interesting from Mr. Hickey was, what would happen if National was in? Would a national government have done anything differently? I doubt it, said Bernard Hickey. The wealth shift benefited the median voters that both major parties need to win elections. National has also not framed this issue as a wealth redistribution issue. It has framed it as a cost of living issue. The subtext is that higher inflation creates the danger of higher interest rates, which in turn risks reversing some of the multi-decade capital gains created by the lower than expected inflation from 1990 to 2020. So his position basically is, I'm flippantly paraphrasing, but would National have done anything differently? Probably not. So now they get to criticize the government who had to do something, but his position is they probably wouldn't have done anything different.
Yeah. We're talking about enormous amounts of money, and when you think about where that money has gone, most people will focus on the fact that I got paid to stay home for 2 months. The business, I could pay my mortgage, I could pay my food. Now the mortgage goes into the pockets of Australian-owned banks, so that goes overseas, so that's gone. It goes into massive companies like Fletcher's. And these companies are turning in like big profit forecasts. They're paying out to their shareholders and stuff like that. And at no point have they gone, you know what? That saved our bacon, and we've come out of this pretty well. So as a good corporate citizen of this country, we're going to get on the phone to the tax department and pay them a dividend. Pay them some of the money back. A lot of those companies are saying, no, stuff.
Well, but can I ask this question? One of the big criticisms of the American government at the global financial crisis, when they bailed out the motor industry, that sort of thing, although the motor industry did pay them back, was quite soon after they bailed out the banks and they bailed out the motor industry, those executives got their bonuses. Yeah. And these industries were saying, well, it's in their contract, we can't not do it. And they paid out their executives millions of dollars in bonuses because it was part of their contract. The American government could have bailed them out with some contingencies, which they didn't do. It sounds like what you're saying is that maybe one of the criticisms that we can lay at the feet of Labor during this is they should have had some contingencies in this sort of stuff, that you are actually going up 5% in tax until it gets paid back or something, so that they would have got a return on the money. So that seems like a fair criticism to lay at the feet of them. If they've just given them money and that's been dispersed elsewhere and the company's now going on, good for the economy that's doing that, but possibly we could have seen a bit of a back end as a taxpayer.
I mean, Labor said it really early on when they were talking about the wage subsidy, that it was going to be a high trust model. And I appreciate the fact that they did that, because it was more about this needs to happen now. Right. People need to keep their jobs. People need to pay their mortgages. People need to keep their homes, all of that sort of stuff. That was the important thing. But where has been the conversation that has been around, like, okay, so now we're past that danger period. How's everyone doing? Oh, holy shit! You've had $20 billion worth of profits off the $20 billion that we gave you. That's interesting. Maybe if we could go halvesies,
But if it's not contractual, I like what you say about being a good citizen. But if it's not part of the agreement, who's going to do
contracts, lawyers, push past it. It's an enormous amount of taxpayers' money. And the thing is, when National are criticising Labor for a massive amount of spending, they must be looking at the same thing. Are they not looking at like, geez, it'd be a win if we could get this money back, But it takes a crisis away, doesn't it? They want to have the problem and solve it, not, and at the end of the day, it's going to be the taxpayer carrying the can again.
Yes, very good. Hey, I want to throw one more quick one in there. It's just a shorty, so we're not going to be too much longer on this. But I found out something quite interesting tonight about the smoke-free New Zealand plan by 2025. Here's the first thing, yeah. So the enforcement level for the smoke-free New Zealand by 2025, what they're doing is basically, if you're age 13 or under in New Zealand, the legislation says you will never legally be allowed to buy tobacco. I'll just play out a little bit about what the actual commentary is, because I've got a question about that.
Banning the sale of smoked tobacco products to anyone born on the 1st of July 2009 onwards. So basically, if you're watching this program, you're about 13, 14, you and anyone younger than you will never be able to buy smoked tobacco products in Aotearoa, which is incredible. Sounds incredible, but will it work? Is this an evidence-based policy? Do you have any international models to...
Anyway, that'll do. She goes on to ask, are we the first country in the world to do that? And the answer is yes, we are the first country in the world to do that. Here's my question about that. And I don't have the answer, but this is the question. How is that legal? Like, how is there a product in New Zealand that's legally available to buy if you're 18 and above, that in 5 years' time, when that 13-year-old turns 18, they're not allowed to buy it? I mean, is that not the literal discrimination based on age example? Like, I'm not saying it's a good thing that people go out and smoke and stuff, but I'm saying, how can you legally say to a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old in 7 years' time, you can't buy cigarettes, but to a 30-year-old, sweet as, knock yourself out? How is that going to be legal? I just wonder if that legislation, albeit in the right spirit to stop people smoking, how that's ever going to be legally achievable. Well, that was my thought.
We've already got age restrictions. It's just this one's a rolling one, isn't it? Isn't that the idea?
But once, yeah, it is. You're right. But once you're a 30-year-old, let's say that 13-year-old is 30. So you're well past any kind of child or young adult or anything. To have a 40-year-old adult that's allowed to buy tobacco and a 30-year-old adult that's not, I have no idea, but I just wondered, how is that legal and how will that actually play out? If someone took that to the Human Rights Commission or to the High Court and said, well, this is discrimination based on age, I just wonder, how is that ever not going to be overturned? Just a thought. And the second thing that I wanted to put out there is, I learned this from the same interview today. It's very quick, but if you're watching right now, just think, when you hear the term smoke-free New Zealand by 2025, well, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking no smoking in New Zealand by 2025, a smoke-free New Zealand.
That's not what the name.
Yeah, that's not what it means. And I was really shocked to hear this.
I just want to preface the interview by clarifying that Smokefree 2025, what it really means is reducing the overall smoking rate across all population groups by less than 5%, isn't it? So not a complete zero, but less than 5% is what you're looking at.
How the hell is that Smokefree New Zealand by 2025? Reducing smoking across all sectors by less than 5%. So why isn't it called that? I know it's harder to put on a bumper sticker, but how can a smoke-free New Zealand policy mean reducing smoking across the board by less than 5%?
No, is that what they said? Or is across all sectors of New Zealand, there's less than 5% of people that are smoking?
No, reducing it by 5%.
That's very confusing.
Shall I play it again to make sure that I'm not messing up, which has been known to happen before? Here we go.
Morena, Dr. Verrill, wonderful to have you with us this morning. I just want to preface the interview by clarifying that Smokefree 2025, what it really means is reducing the overall smoking rate across all population groups by less than 5%, isn't it? So not a complete zero, but less than 5% is what you're looking at.
She says there, it's not a complete zero. It's reducing the rate by less than 5%.
I don't know. I think she got her words wrong there, but maybe. But yeah, a less than 5% reduction does not sound good. But if it's less than 5% of people smoke,
but also, the reason that actually makes logical sense to the policy is 2025 is in 3 years. Why would they be putting a policy in on 13-year-olds now? Because in 3 years they're only going to be 16, and they still wouldn't be allowed to buy tobacco at 16. So I guess what I'm kind of going is, PR and marketing, well, not PR, but marketing is a part of my bag, baby. And Smoke-free New Zealand, I don't know, maybe they need to figure out, because I'm thinking Smokefree. So now I feel disappointed. Well, not disappointed, but I'm like, well, you're ripping me off with your title, you know. so you're like, so basically, I'm thinking that you're lying to me, and what else about the situation is lying to me because it's completely inaccurate.
Just to take away from the serious part of it, I would also be very supportive of any government initiative to ban scented vaping products because they're gross.
Really?
They're gross. I don't want to walk behind someone that smells like a bakery's butthole while he's vaping on the way to work, blown out just fat clouds of candy.
A bakery's butthole. That's interesting.
Yeah, like, you know what I mean. It's definitely called bakery butthole, I'm sure.
All right. Talking earlier about the $1 billion, Ben says $1 billion is not much over the time period. Would also cost a lot more to keep experts employed in departments, have comfy job for life, etc., etc. Someone agrees with you about being paid in cheese. I want the cheese. Kookie says it's very hard to get skilled people to work for the government. That's why they often hike the contract roles to appeal to private industry professionals. And I'm not sure if you showed Carl's comment, but bureaucrats conjures images from gliding on. Most public servants aren't on gentlemen's hours and getting sloshed at lunch like the 80s. I remember gliding on.
I feel that National's still trying to stop gliding on.
Yeah.
I think that's the institutional base that they have, is that bureaucrats, even the ones that are working for them, are all like that. Like
very
fighting
good.
The battles of the past.
Very good. All right, guys, we're done. Tomorrow night, Professor Michael Baker will be joining us for some of the show. Well, probably a pre-record, but we'll be on the show. Sort of just catching up with where we're at with COVID. I saw that Ashley Bloomfield said today, no, I have to be honest, I just read the headline, but it seemed to be saying the headline was that we're now not expecting to get the worst case scenario for the second Omicron outbreak, which is pretty cool. But we'll check all that in with Michael Baker tomorrow night. And also, I haven't decided. What do you think, Chewy? Shall I play that full podcast on Friday night as a full interview or not? Where are you leaning on that?
Yeah, we've done that before. It works really well.
I guess the thing is I'm releasing it on Friday morning, so anyone can just go and get it. But I guess we have a bit of a community here of people watching live, and then it could play out live as people were watching along, and just show people what's going on.
I like it.
All right. So let's do that. We'll do that podcast, which is being released on Friday morning at 8:30 a.m. if you want to check it out. But if you don't, Friday night we'll put it up. We'll put it up and play it out as live, so it'll premiere, and you'll be able to check it out. I might even try and go change the branding around it and turn it into a black border like this one is, just to be a bit flash, cuz. So we will see you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. Professor Michael Baker. Thank you for joining us. Remember, go and join our Discord. And as we grow the Discord, we are looking to take, calls and stuff on that as we go through. We had one or two of those this week. And we'll just continue to grow that slowly but surely. And other than that, be safe wherever you are. Wash your hands. Wear a mask when you're out in public. And we'll catch you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. Thanks, Chewy, mate. All the best.
Hooroo.
See ya.